episode.
Yeah, I've seen that kind of stuff. So it's all on the pads now. So I also that's what I've been doing for the past couple days.
Nice.
Like, how do I make this thing work? And that flurry of coins, I just thought that was like, it's about as random as it gets.
Mm-hmm. Like Sonic losing his coin.
I saw this good joke online. This guy's like, I was at a Walmart and this dude was running to the cashier and cut this lady off, and he slipped and fell, and a bunch of coins fell out of his pocket. And she's like, "Damn, Sonic!" Like, when Sonic is invoked to to cast some shade, that's just.
Did you see they are about to release this Sonic movie, and it's like people petitioned and shit to get the animation changed, and I was thinking about it, like, I don't know if that's a good thing that people expend that kind of energy on that kind of shit, where there's a difference between putting energy behind something and then not putting energy behind something. And the places where people choose to put their energy, you end up seeing these weird, like the Joker, for example. Like, a ton of people put their energy into the Joker film because it resonated with them for whatever reason.
They're gonna make us another one, apparently.
I mean, yeah, of course
they need to.
It was made $1 billion. Of course they're gonna make a second one. But the only reason they're doing it is because so many people put energy into it. They weren't planning on making a second one, or at least they claim. But in that's where I'm looking at it, like, you know, between Notre Dame burning down and the Joker film, where people choose to put their energy and money is like, it's crazy what ends up what cultural movements end up happening and shaping how people perceive what's culturally acceptable to, like, throw money at. And then on top of it, it becomes this thing where it's like a point of, like, religious affiliation, in that the way that the Joker movie came out, you either loved it or you hated it. You couldn't feel, you know, apathetic about it, or just, okay, it's a mediocre film. Like, you couldn't be that person, or else society pushed you to one side or the other.
I'm in the extreme minority, because I actually think that the Leto Joker was really well executed.
I mean, but that's a product of cultural influence. The only reason people thought that was because it's the same shit where before the Joker film came out, it was, you know, half the audience or half the anticipated audience was saying this was going to be terrible, and the other half was saying, you know, this is going to possibly be the best iteration of Joker since Heath Ledger. And
yeah,
I think people, you have to have a polarizing viewpoint on something in 2019. You can't just have a, you know, oh, this is a 6.5 or 7 film. Like, it has to be either a 10 or a 0.
When did it get so we
polarized?
Lost this? Yeah, polarizing. And so we used to have a spectrum of you know, appreciation for all forms of media at some point. And now you're right, it is, does it sell, or does it not reach critical mass? And that's got to be, like, that's
I
just
feel like Avatar did it.
yeah.
I feel like Avatar did it, and I feel like that was the marked point because it became a thing where if you made a film and it made a ton of money, it was like, oh, this is a blockbuster. It wasn't the goal to make $1 billion movie. Whereas once Avatar came out, I feel like if your movie didn't make at least $500 million, is seen as a failure in Hollywood, no matter what the return. Like if you made a movie for $3 million and then it made $200 million, it's still a failure because it didn't make $1 billion after Avatar. And that's kind of where there's this element of box office sales partially defining the quality of a film, even though that has nothing to necessarily do with the quality of a film, but then people invoking the sales to imply that sales are directly correlated with
that's the
the
same thing
quality.
with Billboard charts
Right, yeah, exactly the same.
and the art
Exactly.
world, and there's a lot of places where things are worth a lot of money, but it doesn't always mean that it's good. It just means that it's valuable to a certain market.
Yeah.
I think I think somewhere along the lines there's been like this cultural misinterpretation of the difference between like the aesthetic value and monetary value. It's
Mhm.
like when it comes to things that I don't know what the word is, things that we turn into little icons.
Yeah.
And this goes beyond like sentimental value. I mean, like there's some things that people truly value, like not to diminish the historical value of artifacts, but the reality is a lot of those things are just rocks that managed to survive however many hundreds of years or thousand years or however long they survived, but they just survived, and they might not have any real cultural significance. It could have been someone's like you know, a chess piece.
Right.
And just happened to survive. There's I see this at car shows actually, where you see some car is in remarkably good condition for its age,
Mhm.
but there was nothing special about it ever.
Yeah.
It just survived.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's true with a lot of uh, manufactured items. I
Yeah.
think it's going to be true with most manufactured items in that um, when things become valuable because they're rare, it's only because of either a disconnect in time or a mass destruction of a certain thing that leaves the remnants, and that's kind of where value monetary measurement not is not. It's implied that it's correlated to being or to the rarity, but that's only because people watch Antique Roadshow and assume that something is old
I think the
and
thing
rare
that
is
eBay
valuable.
taught me is that rare piece of audio hardware, they made like 10,000 of them,
Right.
or or that rare voice that used to only exist, like one in a million, is actually one in 10,000, and we know this because of YouTube.
Yeah.
And the that incredible photographer that everyone knows, there are millions upon millions
Hmm.
upon millions of incredible photographers, and the internet brought all of them to the front, to the same
Well,
stage. And
this was forecasted by Marshall McLuhan in that the thing that was separating the professionals and the amateurs previously was access to tools, and now that the tools are less cost prohibitive, then the quality is also the same. Where you see fan made films that are on par with what's coming out of Hollywood, and this is why they had to retool the Sonic animation because somebody came out and made one that was better than what they did
well,
with like $30 million.
that's kind of the thing, is that content will ultimately, trump delivery. A good story, a good a really well framed scene, brilliant cinematography, brilliant composition will include these things as aesthetic components, and so these are like deliberate decisions at that level.
Hmm.
And I think that what we, I mean, you're right. The tools have been made extremely accessible. I think the real key is that the delivery mechanism has been opened up, like wide open, and it's even easier to find an audience, or for the audience to find whatever kind of creative, you know, output that they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the real key, is that we have so much more access. And my dad has always said, the cream rises to the top,
Yeah.
meaning like the good stuff always ends up at the top. It's just the nature of things. And there's this real truth to that on some level, um, where every so often I come across some artist that I've never heard of before,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not a part of any major industry name, label, whatever. But they've got like 12 albums, full albums, and then I go listen to, selections of it all, and it's like, holy crap, this is like a fully formed machine, music
Mm-hmm.
machine. Why have I never heard of this? And just because you can't listen to everything, you just can't. And then I find out more about the people that they work with, and realize that, oh man, there's this incredible group of musicians. They all actually work together at some studio, and then they all support a variety of different artists. And
Mm-hmm.
and then you realize that there's this other, it's just it's an independent label, and they're doing their thing. And then there are thousands of independent labels, and so it's kind of, I don't know. It's interesting, because there are, you're right. There are people that are turning out like high quality, like high level industry level output.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the number one Billboard, I think, song of all time now is something that was made off of a YouTube track.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. The the guy basically, I mean, not basically, he bought a fucking track off of YouTube and then put his vocals on top of it, and then got a remix with Billy Ray Cyrus, and now the number one fucking streaming track of all time. That's about as basement fucking sleeping on the couch production as you can possibly get, and that's, I mean, then they redid it in
A
a
real
big
studio.
studio. Yeah, but that's where there's no difference to the audience at that
Huh.
point.
Well, that's kind of like the classic um, demo tape. Here, just get this to the guy at the label. He'll have them
Hmm.
listen to it. I know they'll like it.
Yeah.
But for a modern age with a modern medium, and instead
Yep.
of relying on other, well, they relied on lots of people to do it, but relied on a viral mechanism.
If it was organic, but
If it was organic.
I mean, this is also where, it's hard to tell if, because people's opinions are subject to influence and also not very good at critical judgment. When people are trying to say what's good, they're always looking to some authority figure to tell them what's good before they accept it as good. So then that's kind of where, oh, you need the Billboard chart to tell you, oh, it hit number one, so it must be good. If you're not a critical thinker, and a lot of people just aren't critical thinkers, so
Well,
this gets back to the notion of why the value system's broken,
yeah.
because people don't know how to judge what's good without asking some authority. And in that, it's like, is that built in? Is that, it's obviously trained when the whole system of schooling makes you, raise your hand to ask to use the fucking bathroom, let alone if something is good. You can't regulate your own body functions,
Yeah.
let alone figure out if something's of quality.
If the collective consciousness can't determine whether something or not is good or has value, there's no way they're ready for something like Bitcoin, where the inherent value is fluctuating at rates that it's hard to keep up with unless you're really paying attention to it.
Well, and that's kind of where people's inherent notion of their dollar value as being stable is flawed, in that this is kind of where I'm wondering how much of it is programmed in the sense of every time the gas price changes, that's your dollar changing value.
Yeah.
But we're trained to think, oh, gas is changing, milk's changing, eggs are changing, and compartmentalizing all these different items as if their value's changing and the dollar value's not changing as well. You can't have both, or you can't have one without the other.
What's interesting is that the value of milk relative to the value of oil is more stable than the U.S. dollar is relative to gasoline or milk.
Typically, but then some shit will happen where...
if there's a milk shortage, of course.
That happened
then
this
things
year.
change.
That happened.
Yeah.
Where milk went from like, it was like $2 a gallon to $4, which that's half your dollar value loss.
Yep.
But people don't think of it that way. They think of milk becoming more expensive, which intrinsically it's the same thing, but because we're trained to disconnect them, for whatever reason, people still hold the idea that their dollar is not changing value when milk goes up in cost.
My dad said that one time that the value of gasoline relative to bread and milk is relatively the same, has remained relatively the same since he was a kid. Obviously they've gone up in price, but those three things have been relatively the same price.
I mean, because there's been price controls put on them.
Yeah.
There's
so at some
price
point,
mechanisms or price gouging mechanisms that are legally in place to protect, even down to the oil reserves in Alaska. That's a.
So when when they finish pumping the oil out of Alaska and into those giant pits in Texas, and then we could finish consuming all of that here in the next 20 years.
I mean,
if it even lasts that long.
No, it wouldn't last that long if we only use that. But the whole reason it's there is because of the oil crisis in the '79. So, between the price gouging that happened on,
well, I remember back in like 2000, early 2000 something, they said that the original estimates to last 50 years were wrong, and that they were just wrong, completely wrong, and because they hadn't anticipated, the rise of the SUV and the consumption of gasoline at the rate that it had been increasing, or the number of new drivers.
Yep.
And then fortunately, there's been a decline in the purchase of new and even used automobiles, and there's a decline in the number of the rate of new drivers apparently, but that's not like.
Because of things like Uber.
Yeah, Uber and Lyft have changed everything.
And this gets back to the whole notion of the infrastructure was originally built around public transportation.
Yeah.
But then the automobile industry shaped our legislation and the way our country was built for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
So now we have an automobile-based economy with trains that are shit. It takes so long to get across the country on a train, whereas, I mean, it's not fast. It's faster to drive than to take a train.
If every city or town had a train system running through it, and then had buses that ran perpendicular to that train, just in a perpendicular kind of a loop type arrangement around the place, or even occasionally driving uptown. There's a way to work all that stuff out, but there would still be more efficient transportation with something like that, with the train.
The big issue is like the mountains and shit when you're trying to get out west, and then there's lots of stretches of terrain where you can't just build a straight road, so kind of
I remember,
or a straight track or whatever.
Like it was like 10 or 15 years ago. There was some huge snowstorm out in Denver, and electric trains, they run a diesel generator, but they don't produce the kind of heat that steam engines do. And so they were running into ice and snow, and they couldn't get past, and so they got steam engines out because they would just melt everything in front of you, just go real slow, and pull the trains. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Go steam engine, go. Old technology is still really badass at something.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is there's just different periods of building towards long-term cohesion with the earth and its movements, or trying to build around, trying to overcome the Earth and its movements, and the ones that try to overcome it are the least long-term lasting, which is why you see the wonders of the world. You know, there's elements of it where there's like no steel girders in a fucking pyramid or anything like that, but
It's still there.
right, because of the method of construction and understanding how the Earth is going to shift and how it's going to move over time and things such that, you know, things like that where there's code where if you live in a region where there's like earthquakes a lot, you have to have the building up to code and up to standard, but those things are more reactive in the sense of government imposed regulation, whereas the government doesn't understand long-term building, and then they just basically take whoever word for it that they arbitrarily decide is the expert, and then that becomes a standard. Whereas it's like if there was more of just a philosophical predisposition, like have you seen those land bridges that are highways of natural growth across that go above highways so that animals can go
Oh
across?
yeah,
Like their theory,
there's a no. There's they did that in
they've done a few,
in like
but
in Europe.
yeah,
That's where I've seen images and like in over stretches of autobahn, and it's decreased.
the animal accidents,
Yeah,
because then the
like
animals have a natural path across
yeah,
above, and it
they're
doesn't
big
cross.
too. They're not small
Yeah,
at all.
exactly.
They're like a football field worth of grass,
Yeah,
and so there's a tunnel basically.
yeah, and that's kind of where.
We need those in Indiana.
Oh, for
In some
sure.
places, if not, if only for like tornado shelter for travelers.
I mean, yeah, that's a good idea too, and I think part of it again is we're not building in 3 dimensions. We're only building in 2 dimensions, even though it feels like if the road goes down a hill, that feels like we're building in 3 dimensions, when really that's still just the 2 dimensional movement
Yeah.
that happens to go with the 3 dimensional curvature of the Earth. In that, if okay, Elon Musk has talked about it in that if you have one road and then a tunnel going above it and a bridge going above it, or tunnel going below it and a bridge going above it, then that's more building in 3 dimensions, because then there's more freedom of movement. And obviously they have to be connected, but it's more so we don't need flying cars to move in 3 dimensions is
Yeah.
what he's getting at. And that's kind of where I haven't seen a lot of people put forward that argument as succinctly as he's done it, concerning, like, because he doesn't like the idea of flying cars, which is crazy to me that Elon Musk of all people is against flying cars, which is like, that's fucking crazy, right?
So I've always been kind of concerned that at some point there will be malls on interstates that are only accessible through interstate. Like the interstate pulls off, instead of like going to a gas station, it actually just pulls into a parking garage.
I mean, like
And there is a gas station there, but then the whole point is just to go to this mall.
it's like outlet shopping.
Yeah,
That's what outlet shopping is already.
yeah.
Because people literally will do trips to go to outlet malls, and there's nothing there but fucking an outlet mall and a fucking gas station and like
Every time
Wendy's.
I've driven cross country and I've driven by an outlet mall, I've only ever seen like a few cars in them.
Mhm.
It's not like I'm trying to travel like, on Sunday when, well, actually, sometimes.
But which outlet mall was it though?
Huh?
Which outlet mall was it? Because there's like Tommy Hilfiger and fucking Ralph
Oh,
Lauren
yeah.
and Donna Karen and the high brand outlet malls where people, like I said, they'll drive just because then you hit a clearance sale,
yeah,
and then all of a sudden it's worth it for that gas
a
money.
Walmart-sized version of.
Basically.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I see these giant super versions of stores, and there's only like 3 or 4 cars in them, and I'll be driving by around like lunchtime, and maybe things have changed. I haven't driven long distance in a while, and haven't seen any of these things like really, or at least not trying to look, not even looking at them, because I've been driving, I guess. it's just there's something about that that's really it's always been strange to me. The idea of like a mall out in the middle of nowhere, because it really limits the clientele. It in itself imposes a
Hmm.
its location imposes a barrier on its potential clients.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's the same thing with like skydiving.
Yeah.
Same shit with scuba diving. Anything that is cost prohibitive at all imposes a level of exclusion on its clientele. And this is kind of where. So there's this restaurant in Indianapolis. It's only open on Saturdays and Sundays. I believe it's still open because it's always packed. So when you come out and you create an exclusionary wall, there's people who want to go behind that wall and
Yeah.
say like, "Oh, I'm in this specific club." So there's an element of building a niche audience is just as good, if not better, than trying to appeal to everybody. I think it's better.
Yeah.
And it's easier to build a following that way. And this is kind of where, when it comes to um, commerce, it's people recommend that you focus on one thing. Obviously, in 2019, you can't really only do one thing, but this is kind of where the notion of, if you want to create a following or an audience or clientele, you have to pick a specific thing. Otherwise, trying to go for everybody, you're not going to hit any target. It's like too
Yeah.
generic of a
Well,
brand
then
at
you
that point.
become Walmart.
I mean, Walmart even has a specific clientele because that's where you have Sam's Club. Walmart versus, it's the same company, but the clientele at Walmart is the fucking plumber's crack, might be on meth, fucking doesn't think far ahead, versus the Sam's Club packing up for winter. You
It's
know,
it's
it's the
ants and
yeah,
grasshoppers.
exactly. That's in a nutshell the difference between Sam's Club and Walmart, and it's the same fucking company, but they have, you know, it seems like they're going for everybody, but they're not. They have a specific target, but this is where they mask it. And
Mm.
so this is kind of where you see like restaurants that have fucking 75 items, and then you have a burger joint that has burgers, fries, and shakes, and it has 3 items. And that burger joint only goes for burger. Like, if you want a burger, that's all the fuck you can get when you go to a burger joint. But you go to Taco Bell, now you might be able to get like
A burger.
a burger. Right. No, you go to Burger King,
That's
you get a
right.
taco
That's
now.
right. That's right.
And that's kind of, that's the whole
And
notion of,
it's like a fried crispy taco.
or when IHOP tried to start having burgers and people have lost their minds, they're like, no, I only want, it was clearly they got their demographic wrong. The people, when you say this is International House of Pancakes, people don't want to go there for a fucking burger.
Yeah.
They want to go there for pancakes. They don't want nachos. They don't want
I don't
pizza.
even want waffles when I go to IHOP.
Right. Yeah.
If I want waffles,
exactly.
I'll go to Waffle House.
Or Bob Evans or some shit. Like,
Yeah.
you don't go to International House of Pancakes for waffles even. And that's this is again where we have this notion of, man, it's really crazy because I don't know which comes first, the idea of brand reliance based, because this is like one of the things I started to
When I want a
realize.
chicken sandwich, it's a decision between which is closer, Wendy's or McDonald's. But when I want chicken, it's like, man, do I really want to tempt fate with KFC?
So let me this is gonna, okay, how often would you assume that you eat without watching media or consuming media in some form, whether it's like sonic or visual or combination?
Oh, good, good. I gotta like go out of my way to do that anymore. It's you gotta turn your phone off. You gotta go to a quiet room. You gotta close the shutters because
So then on top of that, I mean, like, how much of that while you're eating are you then actively controlling? Like,
I'm pretty sure that we're inundated by media. I'd have to you can't even, I mean, unless you're one of those people that doesn't have books on shelves and I'm not sure if I trust people like that. But you can't get away from media. You have to have like a blank room to get away from everything,
Right.
and that's like
So
that's the kind of place we put crazy people.
so then how often do you eat in the same
Spaces.
spaces in the same media surroundings?
Hmm. I think I try to eat in the same places. Like I try to eat in the kitchen sometimes, and sometimes I eat in front of the computer, even
Mm.
though I really shouldn't. And sometimes I eat in the living room.
So then
Sometimes I eat in the vehicle, in the truck.
how much of your eating experience is controlling your sensory input? Like, this is I'm phrasing this as questions because it's probably, I mean, obviously it's going to vary for people, but then this is what I'm getting at is
The only thing that I can really control is like when I take a bite, and that's really it. And then after that, it's just kind of like everything else is an environmental input.
which is,
It's all sensory input.
so this is
I mean, short of having some weird kind of synesthesia and like seeing, flavors and tasting sounds and all that good stuff. It's like,
so then how much of your eating experience is an attempt to get an effect of nostalgia in some form, whether it's recreating the same sandwich taste, i.e., going to the same KFC to make sure that they don't mess up your order and it has the exact same taste. Because again, that's like,
uh, I think KFC is a strange candidate because I
I
remember.
mean, insert random. The notion is that you're going to a place that has a formulaic structure for their food now. Every time somebody makes a sandwich there's a chart there that shows them
Sure.
exactly how many pieces of lettuce to put on there,
Yeah.
exactly how many pickles, exactly where to place them. There's a fucking picture.
Yeah.
That's a formula
The
for that
diagram.
food. Right. So you're going to a place that has a formulaic approach to their food to try to reproduce that same sensory experience, which is where you get a lot of people who go to the place that has 75 and they keep going back to the same sandwich. So what I'm getting at again, how much of this eating process becomes an attempt to create a nostalgic.
I don't know. When I was younger, I really liked the quarter pounder with cheese, but then I outgrew the quarter pounder with cheese and stopped liking cheese on hamburgers. And then at one point, I didn't eat McDonald's burgers. I really only ate their chicken sandwiches.
Mm,
All the while, I still would only go to like Burger King for a Whopper, and I still don't really trust their chicken sandwiches. But that's beside the point. So, and, and then later, I decided that I liked the double hamburger at McDonald's, which led me later to trying the Whopper, or not the Whopper, the Big Mac, which I had never liked before because it has the Thousand Island
mm-hmm.
dressing sauce stuff on it. I never liked that when I was younger, but then I decided that the Big Mac without cheese was actually a really interesting hamburger. Actually, I'd also remove that center piece of bread because I didn't understand why that existed. It's like, really, I don't need another piece of napkin to eat. Like, but that's beside the point. Also, because I wouldn't have chosen that sandwich when I was younger. So I don't think it's a nostalgia thing so much as
Nostalgia doesn't have to mean young.
yeah,
Nostalgia can be last week.
yeah, no,
That's what I'm saying. In the sense, nostalgia has nothing to do with young. There's an assumption like we could have a nostalgic moment that has to do with like 2 minutes ago
yeah,
or 2 seconds ago.
sure,
That's like, this is why when I'm saying nostalgic, like it becomes
interesting.
like you establish a metric and try to get back to that point. As far like, this is what I'm saying is, as far as I can tell, when people have eating experiences, it's there's an element of nostalgia in trying to recreate an experience
Hmm.
almost every time, whether you're conscious or not. It has nothing to do with your childhood. It becomes the pinnacle of flavor for whatever you're trying to eat. So if it's a meatball sandwich, you're gonna be like, oh, there's this one time I had a meatball sub in Broderpool at the Subway, and
That
that's
was like the
the
best sandwich
and
ever.
I'm every time I have a meatball
It's
sub,
gonna be compared to
it's
that
gotta
one.
have to it's gonna have to try to I'm gonna try to get the ingredients to combination where it reproduces that experience. And every time, unless it's at that specific spot with this person that made it, it's gonna be slightly off. And in my head, as a person who's eating, there's still gonna be an element of like, oh, can it surpass it? And then all of a sudden, this becomes the new thing, which this is kind of where it
I
people's
don't know, man.
moms cooking
I
usually
I I
becomes the pinnacle of some things. Like,
I'm not really. I'm not sure because I made sandwiches for a year at a place called Encore Cafe, which was like, during lunch hour. It was like nonstop sandwich making.
very inconsistent meals though.
Yeah, it
Their
was
food was
all.
super
Oh,
inconsistent.
everything about it was like just like.
Which is why you can't get a
and
nostalgia
and
effect.
so when I think of sandwiches, it's like, does it have the ingredients right? Are the ingredients present?
Hmm.
Cool. I don't care if it's like inconsistently applied mustard or mayonnaise. I don't care about that. Is it just what I asked for there? That's it.
Which
I
is
didn't like.
also why they're not a chain and they never reach. This happens with a lot of mom and pops places because
Yeah.
you get one cook on a Saturday and they had a bad day. They're not going to cook anything the same, and it all depends if on the level of uh, ability of the head chef to prepare their dishes recipes in a way that's reproducible, because technically the head chef's recipe should be
That place
reproduced by the line cook
that place was
perfectly.
like all about, you can reorient your combination of
Yeah,
whatever
no,
here and
and
there,
that
and it was like,
you could never get nostalgia effect.
it was so surreal because after a while it was just like, it was like, the slopping the ladle of food on the plate of rice or noodles, like,
Hmm.
and then here's your plate, here's your bread, and then, and after a while it's just like, I kind of started to feel like this must be what the cafeteria lady at the high school felt like after a
Hmm.
while, except with fewer options to work with. There were a lot of options. It was actually pretty crazy after a while because you stop worrying about what things were and just kind of go by where things were.
Hmm.
People will just point at things instead of to say I want this type of salad. They'll just be like
Yeah.
pointing at it. It's like, yeah, that was a terrible experience actually. Now that I think about it.
Yeah. Are they still open? I feel like they
No,
closed.
I
Yeah.
think they closed.
Yeah. I think that ends up happening with a lot of those inconsistent places, like what was it? Wee Willie's started to get more inconsistent. Um, I know Lady Men's Cafe was like,
Staple of
yeah, but their kitchen started to go to shit, and it was
yeah.
like, you know,
It's
rent goes up or not, their kitchen was not on point towards the end.
I moved. Okay, so I moved to Indiana when I was like 10 years old, and I remember, going to Ladyman's and people being all excited, and it's like, yeah, this is kind of like the diner in Kansas that I've been to one time that I vaguely remember. Yeah. But it wasn't like anything. It wasn't anything special. Like
Yeah.
it was like standard Americana breakfast place where the bacon is cooked to a crisp, where it might as well be a condiment, and the eggs are very consistent.
It's good if you don't know how to cook your own breakfast food, basically.
Um, I mean, dude, I can put a stick of butter into 3 eggs too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's something about it that's like, I think that's like a style of cooking that is like a scaled down version of cooking that's intended to prepare food for a large number of people all at
Mhm.
once. Like, I think that if there may have been a time when there was like a thriving limestone or lumber or something industry in this area where that kind of restaurant would have made a lot of sense, where they would just dump, an entire container of egg on the flat top and turn that into scrambled eggs and serve
Yeah.
that out and have an entire thing of bacon. They just throw that in the fryer and then pull that up a few minutes later, and then all the bacon's done. And then
Yeah.
because that's really, I think that's how that kind of stuff's supposed to work. But when you only have like 1/20th of the clientele coming through the door, you can't prepare food at that scale.
Yeah.
And so at that point, it becomes wasted. The tools themselves become overkill.
Yeah. Very much so. And
I mean,
in that they're kind of generic. The lower clientele doesn't get as many options to get some variation in their food taste. So
Yeah.
then it's like you have fewer people and less capacity to serve the individual. So that person's gonna go. I mean, even Cracker Barrel has better options as a chain.
well,
at that point.
you know, the things that I always thought that made sense for a flat top are American breakfast foods and like teriyaki style grill or flat hibachi style.
Yeah.
So
or like Penn Station
yeah,
style
those
food.
the hot sandwiches.
Yeah.
So right there, that's like breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the same flat top.
Yeah, and I think that's also why White Castle and Steak and Shake can make sandwiches on site rather than having to ship frozen.
Yeah,
It's because they have like
a real
full-on-
flat top.
Yeah, real flat top.
that people know how to use.
Yeah. Well, but this is also where
Some people know how to use.
they have the fucking pictures and
Yeah.
it's formulaic, so you have to be kind of an idiot to
and there are
fuck it up.
timers and
Yeah, exactly.
and
It's
some,
really hard. Once something's a chain, this is why you can go between
yeah.
stores and
Well,
get the nostalgia
consistency.
effect.
Sure, sure.
And this is what I'm getting at in the sense of
So
the more scaled
so
up
is,
you can keep
so
it
is
consistent.
nostalgia like or it's not nostalgia and preference are similar but not the same,
Yeah.
but they're often mistaken for
Yep,
one another.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And this is why people, I think, end up getting into a spot where they get in food. I won't call it rut. It's food habits that they don't know why they're habits. And then when they try to break them and then it doesn't break their nostalgia, then for one reason, either they'll try to keep breaking it to get to a new nostalgia for something else. This is kind of where, for example, if a person eats out a lot,
I got some food nostalgia for you. When we first moved to Indiana, there was a chain called Mark Pie's China Gate, and there have been Mark Pies all over the Midwest. That guy was like, he's in the Guinness Book of World Records for making noodles rated in miles per hour or something like that. And he's a badass, So he's got this whole series of recipes and ingredient lists, and this is how you combine these things to make these things. It's all franchised out. They've got it all sorted out.
yeah,
And they make good food. And they make my favorite version of Szechuan chicken. And they make it in such a way that every time I've gone somewhere else, I've been disappointed.
mm-hmm.
And so when the owner of the one in the Mark Pie in Bloomington closed his doors and moved on, and I stopped ordering that dish pretty much everywhere.
This is exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
I just like because whenever I would go to another restaurant, they didn't make it like they did.
Yep. That's what you're
And-
discussing right now is exactly.
And so, the only times that I will consider it are when I'm at what I know to be a traditional Chinese restaurant, like a legitimate. This is like a serious business. These people, they're from China. They're here to support their kid while he's in school or while she's in school,
Mhm.
and that's what they're doing. Or it's part of their this is how they come to America. They buy a restaurant and get their equity when they move on to the next level of schooling.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
smart.
but this also gets back to the notion we often discussed of so many specific recipes coming out of villages in China
Oh,
where
yeah.
you don't want to you can't fuck it up or else it's no longer that recipe.
Yep.
So this is like,
Well, sriracha doesn't even taste like the sriracha from the
Yeah.
sriracha village.
yeah, exactly.
So,
and it's a name is just not a name. It's supposed to have meaning in terms of the actual flavor representation
Yep.
profile.
Yep.
Um, and that's kind of like this is why people, if you call something one thing and it doesn't have the same flavor profile, people get upset. And
Yeah.
this is where I'm getting to the notion of
The Whopper's a registered fragrance.
yeah. Yeah, they have like perfume shit for it,
Yeah.
which is ridiculous.
Well, no, but the actual the smell of a Whopper is a
Yeah.
registered fragrance.
Yeah, I mean, because they jokingly released. I don't know if it's a joke, but they have a full on like perfume.
Yeah, but
It smells like the Whopper. It's like Whopper perfume.
oh god. So they did analysis of the burgers themselves and the Whopper machine that they pumped the meat through,
Hmm.
to create the cologne. I'm sure,
Yeah.
because I remember it was like 10 years ago, about 10, maybe 11 years ago. I remember reading about this and thinking, I was like, what the crap? This doesn't make sense. And one of my computer science instructors was like, oh no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, think about it. You know what a Whopper smells like. I was like, well, of
Hmm.
course you know what a Whopper smells like. No other burger smells like it.
Right.
He's like, well, consider why. It's like, well, I'm sure they use some special combination of like salts and oils to,
Even down to the grill and
yeah,
the chimney
the
smoke.
temperature, yeah, the hood, the way it
Yeah.
forces the vortex to form.
It's very specific.
Yep.
Yeah.
They scienced a burger to make the Whopper.
Yeah. I mean, but part of that is this gets back to the whole formula of every Whopper pretty much is almost identical in smell. You
Well,
have to really fuck it up as the cook. Like you gotta like spit on it or some shit.
how long do you
And
think?
even then,
How many generations do you think will have to pass before the Impossible Whopper is the only Whopper that people know?
not too many,
Not too
probably
many.
two.
Okay.
I think maybe two. Yeah, just because. So what I'm seeing now, this is a good discussion because, um, I think in many ways, meat as a or not meat, food as a religion, is also because of this nostalgia effect that people want to share and also give others in the same way that they want to pass on religious experiences. So this is very much why, in a way, when you have a meatless option that is indistinguishable from the meat option, people want to share it in the same way. Where it's like if you have a steak or something, and it's at a steak house where it's different than every other place. You recommend that specific steakhouse to your friends, and you say, "Oh, go to this, Little Zagreb's or whatever," because they never clean their grill, so every steak is cooked in the same rub that's been built up over the last 40. This is real.
Yeah, I know.
And that's where
No, no,
that's why.
but there's a certain charm to a full flame steakhouse where they can turn that fire up to incredible heat and cook the outside of a steak perfectly in a matter of seconds, and leave the inside just like
Yeah.
that perfect temperature, and just break all those connective tissue bonds down. Like, there's something to be said for that. And if part of that is it has to cook on ages and ages of curing,
Hmm.
and that's part of the deal. That's why we
Yeah.
can't cook those things at home.
Yeah, I mean, and then it's the same thing with cured meats where, the difference between a meat that was cut and presented within the last week versus something that's been cured for 12 versus 18 versus 24 months, the flavor and texture profiles are just so much different that I think in a way when we present these things, it's I don't know if it just has to do with the capacity to make them, but we're presenting food consumption in a way that it's not always meant to celebrate these experiences, and I think in a way that kind of um, it makes people's eating experiences way less enjoyable than they could be in that there's no reason that you shouldn't have a positive sensory experience every time you eat, but people are then presented these very small windows to eat where you don't want to then go to lunch for an hour and feel like, oh, what's it called, that medieval knights place. That whole thing
Oh,
is,
the one where they harass you.
well, they do the show.
Oh, the one where they have people battling it out.
Yeah, it's like everybody doesn't feel entitled to that experience all the time, because the sensory experience is way more than just the food nostalgia effect. It's the, oh, I'm seeing a live action play slash action adventure played out in front of me, and I get to eat a steak or whatever, you know. And in that, there's kind of um, we're disconnecting the experiences, as if watching TV while eating has nothing to do with the sensory experience, as if, oh, I'm just eating and watching a TV show, instead of looking at it as I'm creating a full-on sensory experience for myself. In that,
Whenever I have dinner with my parents, they eat with the TV off. They turn lights
I
down.
mean, because you probably don't do it that often. If you did it more often,
No, they I mean,
like,
they almost always eat in the same, like, off to the side of their dining area of the living room.
well, do they watch TV a lot in the first place, though?
They have a TV watching time where they watch old, like, film noir together at night.
This is
So
nostalgia, so
yeah,
that's
my dad's into like Japanese crime boss yakuza movies and girl crime boss movies and film noir and Ronin samurai stories. You know, it was funny. I mentioned to him that there was something I couldn't quite shake about Mandalorian. You know, half man, half car. Like I couldn't.
it's a wolf and cub.
Yeah, Lone Wolf and Cub.
Yeah.
And so I'm watching. It's like, what is it? And I started describing. He's like, oh, that's Lone Wolf and Cub. And I said, that's what I couldn't put I couldn't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
And so, like once it occurred to me, it's like that's what they were transmitting. There's a few.
Oh,
other,
it's very explicit.
yeah, there are a few other things that that kind of come through, but not as much as Lone Wolf and Cub for me.
Yeah.
One of my buddies mentioned the Virginian, and I thought, I was like, I can see that. You know, just drawing from like Western themes, but I see this commentary like fairly common. I saw it after the first episode was released, where people were comparing it to spaghetti Western, and I'm not sure if I can call it a spaghetti Western.
I mean, it definitely has those elements.
Yeah,
Like he basically walked into a fucking saloon, and I mean, so much of it takes place in a saloon,
yeah,
where he's getting his missions in a saloon, and like possibly having a shootout there every time, where it only escalates, you know, once the story moves that to that point, but it happens.
yeah.
So, I okay, in the same way
it's
that
like the most
Kung Fu is a spaghetti western.
it's like the most fully acknowledging Western themed Star Wars movie or Star Wars
Yeah,
show
yeah.
that yet. It's like more of a Western than Solo. It's more of a Western than
I don't know if Solo was a western at all. I didn't
think it was
feel
more
like,
of a heist movie actually.
yeah.
Um,
Solo felt kind of soulless. It didn't know what it wanted to
Solo
be.
was like had this great potential with young Solo and young
Yeah.
Lando, and I like it in the sense that we get to explore a few concepts of his past. I wish that they would have done a better job, but I think that you know all of Star Wars to me as a whole has always been some kind of Western.
Mm.
It's like just a big epic Western thematic story, and the sword fighting is just kind of a nod to like samurai, mythology, I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's definitely.
But this one's this one makes me think more of like old samurai shows than of Western, like of gunfighting even, and it's all gunfighting so far.
I mean, I think this is part of it. There's both in that. I think Lando and Boba Fett definitely represented more of the Western style storylines, and then the Jedi were more of the samurai stuff.
Yeah.
In that's kind of always been the juxtaposition as to why you get people who identify more with Boba Fett or with Luke. You know, it's like you don't really get too many people who are all about Boba Fett and all about Luke Skywalker. It's not really the same demographic because of what they're.
They're identifying with a clone.
I mean, yeah. They didn't know that at first.
Yeah.
um,
I think that was one of those like pull the rug out from underneath the audience.
I think
moments.
they did that on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah, just because so many, basically incels had identified with that character.
Like, I remember when the big reveal that he's a clone. It's like it's Django's clone, but he's still a clone.
And he's a clone of like a dude who looks mixed race too.
Yeah.
And I think they did that. I think the Star Wars writers and producers do this shit on purpose to punish the white supremacists that effectively have used their material to create this false narrative of what's actually there. But then I don't think the producers go far enough the other way to sort of expel the white nationalist messages, because I mean, if you look at it, the stormtroopers are basically white nationalists.
Can we really extricate
or white? What is it? Fucking multi-galaxies. Yeah, it's not national. It's multi-galaxies.
They are imperial. They're imperialists. They're part of the empire. They're the knife's edge of the empire. That's what they're and which is funny because it's dull and chipped and cracked and broken in places, because that's the kind of fucking quality the stormtroopers delivered.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. The only time they ever showed stormtroopers with any competence was in the Clone Wars cartoon,
which gets back to their eugenics.
Yeah.
And the whole. I mean, their whole reason to be is to wipe. I mean, to control the universe, but also to wipe out the Jedi as a race, which is this emerging supra ethnic race, like, and supra
who had just gotten done.
It's a super special race,
Yeah.
because any species could be Jedi, but it's a specific trans galaxy race that it's genetic. So this is this weird thing where and in a very not roundabout, it's direct, but also it's not about our current racial divide. It's about a larger racial divide. But it's crazy that this is why they place it in the past, in that we've always kind of, I think, seen Star Wars as futuristic, but the story is supposed to always have taken place in the past.
Yeah,
which
like
is one
a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Yeah,
like,
which is like, I think it's always lost on.
It's a different galaxy.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that there's no intergalactic travel in Star Wars. It's all within the same galaxy.
I mean, as far as we know within the story, but this is where the idea of like hyperspace. It's no, because like. Yeah, I guess it depends on how big their galaxy is, but
even then, galaxy. We've talked about how big galaxies are,
right?
Like, even let's just no.
But they can freeze people in carbonite.
That's true, and there are YouTube videos where they break down like long distance space travel in that universe and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But even then, we're talking about huge spans of time and long distances. That entire story is taking place within a fairly compressed period of time, like. Within the span of 100 years.
Right.
And so, I mean, the entire story of Star Wars that we've seen thus far, it all takes place within that kind of time frame. And so they're not doing intergalactic shit. They're just not. I don't think that they can. I think it's still. I think it's like. I mean, I think they could, if that was part of the goal, but I think that galaxy is completely contained by the Emperor and the Empire itself and whatever form it takes because the darkness is strong in that story galaxy.
I mean, that's under the assumption that everything we've seen is what is all there is, and I don't know if that's like
I don't think that that's the case. I mean, I think there's a
yeah,
lot more going on than what we've seen.
because the reason I say this is because what they've done is get it to a point where they've almost wiped out all of the Jedi in the entire galaxy, but that would also leave it like as to like I can't imagine there's not some protocol where they didn't try to see different planets with like Jedi and carbonite or or different galaxies rather, and have it be like a long-term special protocol. And this is kind of how you could carry this lore into modernity, and have it be like, yeah, they actually sent a ship like billions of years ago towards
It
Earth,
emits
and
like
it took
Metacron radiation,
like
and
it took 4 billion years to get here,
yeah,
and that's where the Jedi in 2019 becomes a thing because then they connect it, and it's like that's how you make it so they actually did attempt intergalactic travel, but because of the actual time span, that's why it's in 2019, and now we have a they don't ever actually date it, but they say this person was in carbonite for billions of years or
yeah.
some shit
So
like or
so
whatever the half life could possibly
this
be.
this a fucking like shriveled up potato looking husk of a ship comes floating into our solar system, and I'm serious, it's like an aluminum potato looking thing, and
Right.
when we get on it, it starts to just crumble away like aluminum foil, and inside there's this dude encased in carbonite.
Right,
That's what
exactly.
you're saying.
That's how, yeah. Like, and that starts the fucking Star Wars 2019 storyline. That's the whole different. It's like the beginning of a whole different universe, but because of the gap in time, like that's where the Jedi story starts, and it wouldn't have been back then. It would have been like way closer to now. Once it got to a different galaxy or some shit, and that's kind of where this is now.
Seriously, though, it would be a fucking like potato looking beat up
Yeah.
husk of of a
Yeah,
ship.
and this is kind of where again there have to be something where then they take into account the half life of whatever carbonite material was supposed
I
to. I
bet
mean, obviously,
carbonite lasts a long fucking time.
right?
I
They can make it
imagine,
up, but then
yeah.
that's where it once they establish it though, that becomes this element of you know the this gets back to the whole notion of it was disconnected in time to establish this futuristic society that was in the past, but now that we're in the future, the 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 social commentary and the implications of what could be done with that storyline are way different. And in that, I think that this is like, well, now we know there's all these other species,
Yeah.
and they would have been doing intergalactic travel by now too. So then it's like this guy who has or what female or whatever. It doesn't have to be human.
The reason that the only reason that we're here is because humans managed to get humans out of that galaxy to this galaxy.
Right. Or if we establish something like that where now all of a sudden this Earth exists within a galaxy where we know these other things exist, and trying to connect them in a way where it's like the first time Vulcans are introduced to humanity through warp drive. That type of storyline, it becomes something way different.
Yeah. That's like I mean, we've also discussed how the likelihood of aliens just intergalactic travelers just coming here in the first place is incredibly low. I think as you put it, by the time that a civilization has intergalactic travel under grips, they would they can produce all the energy they need already. And so it would have to be some kind of weird like intergalactic seeding process.
But I think the Star Wars story has basically been about one family this whole time.
Yeah, pretty much.
So in that, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that there's some shit that we haven't been exposed to as the audience that's like a much larger picture.
It's got to be something like they were scientists who created the nanites that eventually granted people force powers.
Right, yeah.
And so really it's a nanite story.
Yeah.
See, that's like that'd be a much darker version of Star Wars. I'm not sure people would want that.
No, I don't think so.
If we turn it into something like
It's technological.
It's a mad scientist.
It's religious right now.
They don't want to be worshiping the machine.
No. Because then that becomes this weird.
I feel like a man-made machine, worshiping a man-made machine is in some ways better than worshiping some celestial unknown entity, quantity thing that who knows where or what it is. It just appears. At least we know what the nanites are. They had a program originally that unlocked potential and turned people into Jedi. So that's not a bad thing, is it? I mean, that's a cyborg at that point.
Once it's known, though, it can't have these mystical unknowns that you can impose on it. And I think that's like...
That's because they're not thinking in terms of updating their firmware. Get new firmware. All of a sudden, your nanites can like readjust their processes.
Well, this gets back to...
I mean, do we really want nanites, though? Do we want to be that kind of cyborg?
Well, how far off is it going to be before we have cars that have nanites as an exterior and they can rearrange their exterior to an aesthetic or functional form on the fly? So if you want to update your car's exterior, you just rearrange the nanites.
I think that's good. I think that's like super bad, actually. Like, that's the kind of thing that everyone should want. It's like, I feel like today I want a red car. And then as you're driving, it's like, I changed my mind. I want it to be blue. And then it changes. I think that's a good thing. People like options.
But then at that point, why would you need to ever buy another one? If your car could rearrange itself on
obviously the
nanometer level.
Obviously the nanites need nanite juice, and you have to like.
I mean, if it's getting it from fucking solar cell or whatever.
I know, but I mean, if they're gonna make money, they've got to find a way to maintain the consumer side.
But I mean, again, this is.
I think these are the kind of things that can only exist once we move past this whole like consumerism.
Yeah.
I mean, really, because we're never gonna have that level of, the future given to us unless we can get past the whole, accumulation of wealth factor.
Right. Which is the paradox of this idea that it's the accumulation of wealth that's driving these inventions, because there's a
billionaire class that's not inventing shit.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a whole tier of inventions that go beyond profit motive, because once you have it, you can't there's no need to buy anything else ever again.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where, like, you look at this Cybertruck. Have you seen the Cybertruck? And it's like, so say you bought the Cybertruck and you didn't like the exterior. Well, if the car could rearrange itself, then you could just fucking modify it instead of being like, oh, I'm over this exterior, I need to go buy a different one. And in that, it sounds like Autobot shit, but
I mean, I conceptually the Cybertruck is cool, but once I look at it, it reminds me of like Cruising USA. I think I saw one comment that was really good. It was like, imagine how fast it'll go when you turn the graphics down.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what it feels like, right?
It reminds me of this game I played when I was like 11 years old called Spectre, and it was a polygon tank game.
Mm.
So flat field with weird polygons all over the place, and you're a wedge-shaped tank that shoots these little triangles, and you're looking for other tanks to
Yeah.
blow them up.
Well, have you seen Michael Jackson's Moonwalker?
Oh, that game's awesome.
No, the movie.
Yeah. Oh, that movie's awesome too.
Do you remember the Stratus Zero?
Oh yeah.
So that's like a better version of the style of what I think
the,
that the Cybertruck was going
that's
for.
hilarious.
In that, you know, yeah.
I saw another meme. It was a picture of an Aztec trying to procreate with a DeLorean.
Oh god.
Its output was the Cybertruck.
Yeah. That's not far off. Those Aztecs were horrible.
Oh man.
Oh my god.
Those things were so weird. They were like the weirdest. So, cars have this weird shoe-like quality. Trucks kind of look like boots.
Or lunchboxes.
Or
in the case of
lunchboxes.
Aztec.
Aztecs look like a fucking thermos or a cooler.
And they had that Zion or Scion, I think.
Oh, the Toyota underling brand or whatever.
Yeah, it also looked like a lunchbox.
Oh, all those tiny boxes are like that. They're little bento cars. They're so tiny, and I've had a few friends who own those super small cars, and I always like, I'm always surprised. It's like, hey, we got where we're going really safe, but there's still part of me that's like, man, if anything had like hit us, I feel like we all would have died.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think there's the idea that those cars are good for families, but as you're saying, they're not that safe. So that's kind of where I'm looking at the demographic that ends up getting them, and I'm like, what is?
They might be safe if everyone on the road has the same kind of car.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
when we're talking about like a place, when we're talking about America where people drive fucking full size trucks, which are gigantic now, then that's a completely different story. That's like. I mean, I know that it's a good idea. I'm all about, a society driving reasonably sized vehicles that won't cause that much structural damage to buildings if they go flying off the road, or are small enough that they're less likely to hit a large group of people. And
if they're small enough, they just bounce off shit.
Exactly. and there are a lot of, fuel economy bonuses from smaller vehicles, and people don't really need to travel with as much stuff as they think they do.
No.
I think I encourage everyone to travel light sometime. Go on a road trip and only pack one backpack, and you'll realize that you can get by with a lot less than you think you need. But that's not the point. The point is that with smaller vehicles, you can achieve a lot of really cool effects down the road, but only if everyone does it. And all it takes is,
one semi,
or one gigantic truck, or one, giant SUV. And I understand that there are big families out there. That's a thing. But not every family is giant, and I see a lot more giant SUVs than I see reasonably sized vehicles on the road. I think that's a cultural thing in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger car, bigger truck, bigger SUV. It's like, and cars are going away, so bigger. It's bigger. It's better.
Mm-hmm.
That's a quantity over quality.
Right.
And that's like right back around to valuation.
Yep. Full circle.
It's the Sumbitch 3000. It's the top of the line.
Well, that was random.